Hi guys, welcome back to Christy's Book Corner. I'm your host, Christy Mason, and don't worry, I got my water this time so that I don't have a dry voice. And we are going to continue with Chapter 5. Chapter 5, Only a Picture. They had unwrapped the book. Maggie saw the brown paper lighting on the chair. Neither of them noticed that she had come in. Eleanor was bending over one of the reading desks, with Mo beside her. They both had their backs to the door. Amazing! I thought there wasn't a single copy left, Eleanor was saying. There are strange stories about this book going around. A second-hand dealer from whom I buy quite often told me that 3 copies were stolen from him a few years ago, all the same day too, and I've heard much like the same story from you 2 other booksellers. Really? Very strange. Yes, very strange, said Mo, but Maggie knew his voice well enough to know that he was only pretending to be surprised. Well, anyway, even if this wasn't a rare book, it means a lot to me, and I'd like to be sure it's in safe hands for a while, just till I come back for it. All books are in safe hands with me, replied Eleanor, sounding cross. You know that. They're my children, my inky children, and I look after them well. I keep the sunlight away from their pages. I dust them and protect them from hungry bookworms and grubby human fingers. This one shall have a place of honor, and no one will see it until you want it back. I don't really welcome visitors to my library. They just leave fingerprints and stray hairs in my poor books. Anyway, as you know, I have a very expensive burglar alarm system. Yes, that's extremely reassuring. Mo's voice sounded relieved. Thank you, Eleanor. I really am most grateful. And if anyone comes knocking at your door in the near future asking about the book, please will you make out you've never heard of it, all right? Of course. I'd do anything for a good binder. And anyway, you're my niece's husband. I really do miss her sometimes, you know. I expect you feel the same. Your daughter seems to be getting along all right without her, though. She hardly remembers her mother, said Mo quietly. Well, that's a blessing, wouldn't you say? Sometimes it has a good thing we don't remember things half as well as books do, but from we probably wouldn't know anything for very long. It would all be forgotten. The Trojan War, Columbus, Marco Polo, Shakespeare, all the amazing kings and gods of the past. Eleanor turned around and froze. Did I fail to hear you knock? She asked, staring so angrily that Maggie had to summon up all her courage not to turn around and look quickly back out into the hallway. How long have you been there, Maggie? asked Mo. Maggie stood her chin out. She can see it, but you hid it away from me, she said. Attack, she knew, is the best form of defense. You never hid any book from me before. What's so special about this one? Will I go blind if I read it? Will it bite my fingers off? What terrible secrets are there in it that I shouldn't know? I have my reasons for not showing it to you, replied Mo. He looked very pale. Without another word, he went over and tried to lead her to the door. But Maggie tore herself away. Pig-headed, isn't she? remarked Eleanor. It almost makes her like her. Oh, it almost makes me like her. Her mother was just the same. I remember coming here. She stepped aside and beckoned Maggie over. Look, you can see there's nothing very exciting about this book. At least not to you. But see for yourself. We're always most likely to believe the evidence of our own eyes. Or doesn't your father agree? She cast Mo an inquiring glance. Mo hesitated, then resigned himself and nodded. The book was lying open on the reading desk. It didn't seem particularly old. Maggie knew what really old books looked like. She had seen books in Mo's workshop with their pages spotted like leopard skin and almost as yellow. She remembered one with a binding that had been attacked by woodworms. The traces of their jaws had looked like tiny bullet holes, and Mo had gotten out his book block, carefully fixed the pages back together. Then, as he put it, gave them a new dress. Such a dress could be made of leather or linen. It may be plain, or Mo might imprint a pattern on it with his tiny decorative stamps. This book was bound in linen, silver green, like willow leaves. The edges of the pages were slightly roughened, and the pages were still so pale that every letter stood out clear and black. A narrow red bookmarker lay between the open pages. The right-hand page had an illustration on it, showing women in magnificent dresses, a fire-eater, acrobats, and a man who looked like a king. Maggie turned the pages. There wasn't many illustrations, but the first letter of each chapter was itself a decorative picture. Animals set on some of these initial letters. Plants intertwined around others. One F burned bright as fire. The flames looked so real that Maggie touched them with her finger to make sure they weren't hot. The next chapter began with an N. An animal with a furry tail sat perched in the angle between the second and third stroke of the letter. No one saw him slip out of the torn town, read Maggie. But before she could get any further with her story, Eleanor closed the book in her face. I think that'll do, she said, tucking it under her arm. Your father asked me to put this book somewhere safe for him, and so I will. Mo took Maggie's hand again, and this time she followed him. Please forget that book, Maggie, he whispered. It's an unlucky story. I'll get you 100 others. Maggie just nodded. Before Mo closed the door behind them, she caught a glance at Eleanor, standing there looking at the books lovingly, the way Mo sometimes looked at her when he put her to bed in the evening. Then the door was locked. Where will she put it? Asked Maggie as she followed Mo down the corridor. Oh, she has some very good hiding places for such things, Mo replied Mo easily. But their secret has hidden places should be. Suddenly, suppose I show you to your room now. He was trying to sound carefree and not succeeding particularly well. It's like a room in an expensive hotel. Not much better. Sounds good, murmured Maggie, looking around, but there was no sign of Dustfinger. Where had he gone? She had to ask him something. At once, that was all she could think of while Mo was showing her the room and telling her that everything was all right now. He just had to do his bookbinding work. Then they'll go home. Maggie nodded and pretended to be listening, but her mind was full of the question she wanted to ask Dustfinger. It burned on her lips so fiercely she was surprised Mo didn't see it there. When Mo left her to go and get their bags from the camper van, Maggie went into the kitchen, but Dustfinger wasn't there either. She even thought for him in Eleanor's bedroom, but however many doors in the huge house she opened there was no sign of him. Finally she was too tired to go on searching. Mo had gone to bed long ago, and Eleanor had disappeared into her own bedroom. So Maggie went to her room and lay down on the big bed. She felt very lost in it, like a dwarf, as if she had shrunk, like Alice in Wonderland. She thought patting the floral sheets, otherwise she looked like the room. It was full of books and pictures, and there were even a fireplace, although it looked as if no one had used it for at least 100 years. Maggie swung her legs out of the bed again and went over to the window. Outside, night had fallen long ago. When she pushed the window shutters open and a cool breeze flew on her face. The only thing she could make out in the dark was the gravel forecourt in front of the house. A lamp cast pale light over the gray and white pebbles. Mo's striped van stood beside Eleanor's gray car like a zebra lost in the horse's stable. Maggie thought of the house they had left in such a hurry, and her room there, and school where her desk would have been empty today. She wasn't sure whether she felt homesick or not. She left the shutters open when she went back to bed. Mo had put her box beside her. Wearily she took out a bright book and tried to make herself a nice nest in its familiar words. But it was no good. Again and again they thought of that other book, blurred the words out, words again and again. Maggie saw the big initial letters before her, large, colorful letters, surrounded by figures whose stories she didn't know because the book hadn't had time to tell her to her. I must find Dustfinger, she thought sleepily. He must be here somewhere. But then the book slipped from her fingers and she fell asleep. The sun woke her up the next morning. The air was still cold from the night before, but the sky was cloudless, and when Maggie leaned out of the window, she could see the lake gleaming in the distance beyond the branches of the trees. The room Eleanor had given her was on the first floor. Mo was sleeping on 2 doors farther along, but Dustfinger had to make do with the attic room. Maggie had seen it from when she was looking for him yesterday. It had nothing but a narrow bed, surrounded by crates of books towering up to the rafters. Mo was already sitting at the table with Eleanor when Maggie came down to the kitchen for breakfast, but Dustfinger wasn't there. "Oh, he's had breakfast already," said Eleanor sharply when Maggie asked about him, "along with some animal like a Pomeranian dog. It was sitting on the table, and it spat at me when I came into the kitchen. I wasn't expecting anything like that. I made it clear to your peculiar friend that flies are the only animals I allow anywhere near my kitchen table, and so we took the furry creature outside." "What do you want him for?" asked Mo. "Oh, nothing special. I just wanted to ask him something," said Maggie. She hastily ate half a slice of bread, drank some of the horrible bitter cocoa Eleanor had made, and went outside. She found Dustfinger behind the house, standing on the lawn of short, rather rough grass where a solitary deck chair stood next to the plaster angel. There was no sign of Gwen. A few birds were squawking among the red flowers of the rhododendron, and there stood Dustfinger, looking lost to the world and juggling. Maggie tried to count the colored balls. 4, 6, 8. He plucked them out of the air so swiftly that it made her dizzy to watch him. He stood on one leg to catch them, casually, as if he didn't even have to look. Only when he spotted Maggie did a ball escape his fingers and rolled at her feet. Maggie picked it up and threw it back. "Where did you learn to do that?" she asked. It looked, well, wonderful. Dustfinger made her a mocking bow. There was the strange smile of his again. It's how I earn my living," he said, "with the juggling and a few other things." "How can you earn a living that way?" At markets and fairs, at children's birthday parties. Did you ever go to one of those fairs where people pretend they're still living in the medieval times? Look, I'm gonna sneeze. Maggie! There we go. Bless me. There we go. Sorry. Maggie nodded. Yes, she had once been to the fair like that. Sorry. Yes, she had once been to the fair like that with Mo. There had been wonderful things there, so strange that they might have come from another world, not just another time. Mo had bought her a box decorated with brightly colored stones and a little fish made of shiny green and gold metal, with its mouth wide open and a jingle in its hollow body that rang like a little bell when you shook it. The air had smelt of freshly baked bread, smoke and damp clothes, and Maggie had watched a smith making a sword, and had hidden behind Mo's back when a woman in a witch's costume. Dustfinger picked up his jiggling balls and put them back in his bag, which was standing open on the grass behind him. Maggie went over to it and looked inside. She saw some bottles, some white cotton wools, and a carton of milk. But before she could see any more, Dustfinger closed the bag. "Sorry to trade secrets," he said. "Your father's given the book to his Eleanor, hasn't he?" Maggie shrugged her shoulders. "It's all right. You can tell me. I know anyway. I was listening. He's made to leave it here. But what can I do?" Dustfinger said down on the deck chair. His backpack was all on the grass next to him, with a bushy tail spilling out of it. "I saw Gwen," said Maggie. "Did you?" Dustfinger leaned back, closing his eyes. His hair looked ever paler in the sunlight. "So did I. He's in the backpack. It's the time of the day when he sleeps. I mean, I saw him in the book." Maggie didn't take her eyes off Dustfinger's face as she said this, but it didn't move a muscle. He thought he couldn't be read on his brow in the same way as she could read Mo's. Dustfinger's face was a cold, closed book, and Maggie had this feeling that if anyone tried to read it, he would rap their knuckles. "He was sitting on a letter," she went on a capital N. I saw it, his horns." "Really?" Dustfinger didn't even open his eyes. "And you know which of her thousands of shelves that book mad woman put it on?" Maggie ignored his question. "Why does Gwen look like the animal in the book?" she asked. "Did you really stick those horns on him?" Dustfinger opened his eyes and blinked up at the sun. Did I?" he inquired, looking at the sky. A few clouds were drifting over Eleanor's house. The sun disappeared behind one of them, and its shadow fell across the green grass like an ugly mark. "Does your father often read aloud to you, Maggie?" asked Dustfinger. Maggie looked at him suspiciously. Then she knelt down beside the backpack and stroked Gwen's silky tail. "No," she said, "but he taught me to read when I was 5. "Ask him why he doesn't read aloud to you," said Dustfinger, "and don't let him put you off with excuses." "What do you mean?" Maggie straightened up, feeling cross. "He doesn't like reading aloud, that's all." Dustfinger smiled. Leaning out of the desk chair, he put on his one hand into his backpack. "Although that feels like a nice full stomach," he commented. "I think Gwen had good hunting last night. I hope you hasn't I hope he hasn't been plundering a nest again. Perhaps it's just Eleanor's rolls and eggs." Gwen's tail twitched back and forth almost like a cat's. Maggie looked at the backpack with distaste. She was glad she couldn't see Gwen's muzzle. There might still be blood on it. Dustfinger leaned back into Eleanor's desk. "Shall I give you a performance this evening? Show you what the bottles, the cottonwood wool, and all the other mysterious things in my bag are for?" he asked without looking at her. "It has to be dark for that, pitch dark. Are you scared to be outdoors in the middle of the night?" "Of course not," said Maggie, offended, although really she was not at all happy to be out in the dark. "But first tell me why you stuck those horns on Gwen, and tell me what you know about the book." Dustfinger folded his arms behind his head. "Oh, I know a lot about that book," he said, "and perhaps I'll tell you some time. But first, the two of us have a date. Here at 11 o'clock tonight, okay?" Maggie looked up at a blackbird singing its heart out on Eleanor's rooftop. "Okay," she said. "Eleanor's 11 o'clock tonight." Then she went back into the house. Eleanor had suggested that Mo set up his workshop next door to the library. There was a little room where she kept her collection of old books about animals and plants. She kept this collection on shelves of pale, honey-colored wood. On some of the shelves, the books were propping up glass displays, cases of beetles pinned to cardboard, which only made Maggie dislike Eleanor all the more. But the only window was at the handsome table with turned legs, but it was barely half as long as the one Mo had in his workshop at home. Perhaps that's why he was sewing quietly to himself when Maggie put her hand around the door. "Look at this table," he said. "You could sort a stamp collection on it, but not bind books. This whole room is too small. When am I going to put the press and my tools? Last time I worked on up in the attics, but now they're filled with crates of books too." Maggie stroked the spines of the books, cramming close together on the shelves. "Just tell her you need a bigger table." Carefully, she took a book off the shelf. It contained pictures of the strangest of insects, beetles with horns, beetles with brushes. One even had a proper nose. Maggie passed her forefingers over the pastel-colored pictures. "Mo, why haven't you ever read aloud to me?" Her father turned around so abruptly that the book almost fell from her hands. "Why do you ask me that? You've been talking to Dustfinger, haven't you?" "Well, what did he tell you?" Nothing at all." Maggie herself didn't know why she was lying. She put the beetle book back into its place. It felt almost as if someone were spinning a very fine web around the two of them, a web of secrets and lies closing in on them at all times. "I think it's a good question, though," she said, as she took out another book. It was called Master of Disguise. The creatures in it looked like live twigs or dry leaves. Mo turned his back to her again. He began laying out his implants on the table, even though it was too small. His folding tool on the left, then the round-headed hammer he used to tape the spines of books into shape. The sharp paper knife. He usually whistled under his breath as he worked, but now he was perfectly quiet. Maggie sensed his thoughts were very far away. But where? Almost done. Finally, he sat on the side of the table and looked at her. I just don't like reading aloud, he said, as if it was the most interesting subject in the world. You know I don't, that's all. But why not? I mean, you've made up stories. You tell different wonderful stories. You can do all the voices and make it exciting and then fun. Mo crossed his arms over his chest as if hiding behind them. You could read me Tom Sawyer, suggested Maggie, or how the rhinoceros got his skin. That was one of Mo's favorite stories. When she was smaller, they sometimes played at having crumbs in their clothes, like the crumbs in the rhino's skin. Yes, an excellent story, murmured Mo, turned his back to her again. He picked up the folder in which he had kept his end papers and leafed absently through them. Every book should begin with attractive end papers, he had once told Maggie, preferably in a dark color, dark red or dark blue, depending on the binding. When you open the book, it's like going to the theater. First you see the curtain, then it's pulled aside and the show begins. Maggie, I really do have to work now, he said without turning around. The sooner I'm through with Eleanor's books, the sooner we can go home again. Maggie put the book up about creatures who were masters of disguise, but back in its place. Suppose he didn't stick the horns on, she asked. What? Gwen's horns. Suppose Dustfinger didn't stick them on. Well, he did. Mo drew a chair up to the table that wasn't long enough for him. By the way, Eleanor's gone shopping. If you feel faint with hunger before she gets back, just make yourself a couple of pancakes, okay? Okay, murmured Maggie. For a moment she wondered whether to tell him about her date with Dustfinger that night. But then she decided against it. Do you think I can take some of these books to my room? She asked instead. I'm sure you can, so long as they don't disappear into your box. Like that book thief you once told me about. Maggie put 3 books under her left arm and 4 under her right arm. How many was it you stole? 30,000? 40,000, said Mo, but at least he didn't kill the owners. No, that was the Spanish monk whose name I've forgotten. Maggie went over to the door and opened it with her toe. Dustfinger says Capricorn would kill you to get a hold of that book. She tried to make her voice sound casual. Would he, Mo? Maggie. Mo turned around with the paper knife pretending to point it at her, threatening. Go and lie in the sun, or bury your pretty nose in those books. But please let me get some work done. And tell Dustfinger I will carve him into very thin slices with my knife if he goes on telling you such nonsense. That wasn't a proper answer, said Maggie, making her way out into the hallway with an armful of books. Once in her room, she spread the books out on the huge bed and began to read. She read about beetles who moved into empty snail shells as we might move into an empty house, about frogs shaped like leaves, and caterpillars with brightly colored spines on their backs, white-bearded monkeys strapped to antlers, and cats that dig into the ground for sweet potatoes. There seemed to be everything here, every creature Maggie could imagine, and even more than she could never have dreamed existed at all. But none of Eleanor's clever books said a word about martins and horns. There we go. That's the end of chapter 5. Here's our picture of the library and the library door open. And look at all those books. Eleanor's house really has a lot of books. Tomorrow will be chapter 6. And I will see you later. Don't forget to comment, subscribe, and like. And don't forget to dare to dream, guys. See you tomorrow.